Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor Dr. Saxena, Pro Vice Chancellor Dr. Subramanian Swamy, Honorable Joint Secretary of SVKM, Mr. Devatia, who gave me an excellent introduction. I hope I can live up to it. Professor Amita Vaidya, Director of the School of Economics, and Dr. Muralidharan, Assistant Professor in the school, and professors and students. I'm usually quite happy to be back in academic atmosphere, academic situations. I wanted to be a professor when I came back from Harvard, but I was a professor at IIT, but Mrs. Gandhi didn't like my books because it was critical of the Soviet Union. And I was critical of the general joke, which I consider as a joke, the general propaganda that there is no inflation in Soviet Union, there is no poverty in Soviet Union, there's no unemployment in Soviet Union, and went on and on like this, and I was critical of it, and so she ordered my dismissal from IIT. They couldn't think of a reason, so they gave me a letter just of dismissal, one-line dismissal, and said, go and fight it in court, which I did. It took me 22 years to win, but by then I had become a cabinet minister. So I went back for one day, resigned, and asked for my back salary. I got 22 years of my back salary at 8% per year. I think that's a good way to get dismissed. In the meantime, in 1977, the Janata came to power. I, as an MP from Bombay, Mr. Morarji Desai had a very strong liking for me, so he called me and said, isn't it a fact that you were dismissed by Mrs. Gandhi on Mrs. Gandhi's orders from IIT? I said, yes, it's true. He says, I have appointed you as a member of the Board of Governors. So I said, the very body which dismissed me, you made me a member of that. How can I sit with all those people? He says, I've dismissed all of them. So I got my sweet revenge, both from the courts and from the political authorities. And however, I continued to teach at Harvard whenever I could find time, and especially in the summer when Harvard wanted me very much because they wanted professors who had taught in the winter and summer and the spring sessions to come and teach so that the continuity is remained there. Because in summer everybody took a vacation, so they didn't have many Harvard professors to teach. So I continued that till 2012, and I would be happy to continue it. But I got a lot of battles to fight in politics, so that's why I'm still in politics. Today I'm going to speak to you about the GDP and then consequently the target of $5 trillion. Now, I would say in any universities, it's not only a question of asking questions. But there should be a mentality to take risks also in life. And I emphasize this because no economy can succeed unless the general population, particularly the educated population, is ready to take risks. So before you measure it, I want you to know that the driving force is usually the innovation. Every growth, about 60%, if it is due to innovation, you will have very high growth rate. Otherwise, you will run into what is called as the law of diminishing returns. More capital, more labor will give you less and less as time goes on. So instead of going along a curve, you go up a curve, jump curves. And each jump is due to an innovation. Like locomotives was for Britain, Bessemer steel blast furnace. Then it came for Europe. Then the Americans brought in aeroplanes, jet engines, wireless, electricity, telephones, fax machines, and ultimately the internet. So these are all innovations. And it is innovations which ultimately drive the growth and cause the acceleration in the GDP growth. And that innovation you cannot do unless you take risk. Indians are all the time risk averse. Meet any IIM student who's supposed to be in business, and you ask them, what would you like to do after you graduate? They'll say, I will join some multinational corporation. Every year you will get what? You will get a salary increase of 5%. And ultimately, at the age of 60 or 65, you retire with your provident fund and retirement benefits, etc. And then buy a house and watch TV. That is the general life most of the IIM peoples lead. And when I tell them that why you would prefer a job of this kind, as opposed to trying to invent something, bring about some change, like Bill Gates, he created Microsoft, he's transformed the whole world with that. And so, of course, there's a risk, but that risk has to be taken. So why this? Why do you want this? Because this kind of life you all choosing is guaranteed poverty. Whereas Bill Gates took the risky prosperity route and became a billionaire. So the answer was that, well, it may be guaranteed poverty, but it is guaranteed. That's the important part for us. So that's the mentality of avoiding risk. So I would say you have to be dynamic in sense of taking risk. I've taken risk all my life, landed in trouble, but as a consequence, I've even gone higher. Because God usually treats you like a tennis ball. If he hits you on the ground, then you go up even higher and rebound. So I would like to begin by saying economics is a science which is essentially meant for targeting risky alternatives. And that is the context in which the measurement of that, which we call as GDP. The concept and structure of GDP was given to the world by Professor Simon Kuznets. And he was my thesis advisor and my almost like a father figure who looked after me at Harvard and protected me from other professors who didn't like my way of thinking or my approach to problems. It happens, especially when the peer jealousy is enormous in academics. But he saw me through. I became assistant professor, then associate professor, and then when the time for me to become professor came, I got a chance to come back to India, which I came. And in India, I had nothing but problems. But all that has now made me a much better position than all my classmates as well as the fellow professors of IIT. When I look at them, they're all sitting at home and watching me on television. That's a big transformation. So therefore, I urge all of you young people, learn not only to ask questions as Dr. Saxena has correctly put, but also assess and take the correct, calculated risk in your life. Only that is progress. Now, the idea of Dr. Kuznets was to measure the goods and services produced in a country in an economy on an annual basis. That was his thing. But that's simply stated. But there were three problems which he identified. Problem number one, what is the scope of goods and services you will take into account? That means, what will you include and what will you exclude? For example, if you hire a cook in your house, the wages you pay to that cook, or the salary you pay to that cook, is part of the national income. It will be included as service rendered. But supposing your wife was doing all the cooking, Now, you're not going to pay her. So what do I do about her service? Include or not include? Well, people say, how can you? Wife does it out of love. You can't pay. But then if your wife goes to your neighbor's house and cooks food there and gets paid, and neighbor's wife comes to your house and gets paid for cooking, will those two salaries be included? Yes, those two will be included. So here is what looks like a strange thing, that wife's effort to cook for her husband is not to be included as part of the national income. But if the wife is working as a cook in your neighbor's house, then that will be included. And the neighbor's wife comes and cooks in your house, that will be included. So these are some of the difficult problems that you face in this issue. And when I was dealing with China, I'm known in the world as an expert on China. And the Chinese also think very well of me because of many things that have happened where I've been helpful to them for the benefit of India, but as a consequence also benefit of the Chinese. And the Chinese GDP was not constructed till 1981. India's GDP has been since 1950, when we set up the Central Statistical Organization. And the CSO was the first director of that was my father. So he used to take me as a 10-year-old boy at that time to the office. And I've seen how national income was being constructed. And recently I was invited by the Minister of Planning, under whom the Central Statistical Organization is. Recently means about a year ago, excuse me. And I was asked by the minister, because the minister didn't know ABC of economics, he didn't know ABC of anything. He was a nice guy and I liked him. So that's why when he invited me to attend the meeting of the CSO, I went. And so the first question I asked the director of the director of the CSO is that you have given to Parliament an estimate of the 2016-17 GDP in February 2017. In February 2017, 1st of February, they have to present something called an economic survey of India. And that economic survey had an estimate of the GDP from 2016 to 2017. That is the financial year April 1, 2016 to March 31st, 2017. But the budget was presented on 1st of February. And in that he concluded that there is no effect of GDP, on GDP, of demonetization. So I told them, see, you have presented a thick 200-page volume of statistics to Parliament on 1st of February, dealing with statistics of the growth on GDP of the period April 1, 2016 to March 31st, 2017. All right, I accept that you made some projection for the period which was not included because the budget was in February 1st, so you made a projection. But tell me, in our estimation of the national income, you have what we call as informal sector. We have restaurants all along the road when you are traveling on the highway. There is no, I don't even think that they pay income tax. How did you estimate that? How would you estimate the wages paid to servants in various households? This procedure, I can understand as far as manufacturing units are concerned, or even agriculture. There is some kind of physical identification by which you can make an estimate. But how did you make an estimate of this? Previous years, what used to happen is that before the estimate came out, they used to have something called the National Sample Survey which went around making a sample estimate of these things and then projecting it for the whole. That was some kind of scientific basis. But now you give this volume to the Parliament in 1st of February, which means it should have gone for printing in January 1st of 2017, which means you must have written it all during the period of November and December, because it's such a volume, you can't write it overnight. And still you have concluded that the demonetization has had no effect. How did you come to this estimate? So he said sheepishly, I assumed that the previous year, the output ratio between the formal sector, that is manufacturing, registered restaurants, etc., and the formal sector divided by the informal sector, that ratio applied to the formal sector of this year and added that. I said, but the previous year there was no disruption due to demonetization, because demonetization didn't come at all at that time. There was no demonetization. The demonetization was November 8th of 2016. So, therefore, why did you do it? So he said, I was forced to do it. So I told him, can I make this statement to Parliament that you are forced to do it? He said, no, my job will go, please don't do it. So I did not do it. Therefore, the construction of the database is such an important part. And this word GDP is used so loosely. So this is what Kuznets said. Define your scope and then put up front all the things where you are in a strong position or a weak position. China includes potatoes in its food grains. And then that is valuated for national income. We don't include potatoes. Nobody in the world includes in their GDP potatoes. But the Chinese do. Now, you have to, and then all countries of the world, when they value rice, it is after the husk is taken out. The Chinese weigh with the husk on it. So if the Chinese overestimate their GDP, it's no surprise. But you have to know this to be able to make the comparison. So it's very, very difficult to make comparisons without going into the background of how the estimates were formed. And that is the first thing that Simon Kuznets said, identify the scope of what you include in the GDP. The second thing which Simon Kuznets said was the netness, as he called it, N-E-T-N-E-S-S, netness concept, which is, if I produce steel in the country, and then part of the steel goes to make a bicycle, and if I include in my scope both the steel produced as well as the bicycles produced, then I'm doing double counting. And that's very dangerous. And that you have to be extremely careful. And many, many countries you will find that GDP, they don't make that distinction. So you have to take the production and remove all the uses in other intermediate uses. And that's why the concept of input-output analysis came. And now there are big, big tables which the United Nations produces to ensure that you don't double count. If you double count, naturally, it will be a problem. So when you're looking at GDP, please first find out the scope and how it is estimated. Some of them have annual surveys, so you have those statistics, especially industrial production, cement production, electricity. All these things, they are well-established statistical tables. But the informal sector, where you are making a guess or a sample survey, that you must know. And therefore, when you're comparing two countries, you've got to be extremely careful. Then the third thing that comes is something called valuation. And that is where we all trip up, including the Prime Minister of India. And that's why I made bold and said Prime Minister doesn't know any economics. There's nothing wrong. I don't know any biology. So I don't feel ashamed to say I don't know any biology. He doesn't know any economics. He doesn't know economics. Our finance minister also doesn't know any economics. Doesn't matter. You can't blame her. She studied in JNU. So first thing is, how do you compare two periods? Do you compare it in the price prevailing in the two periods? If you do that, you see, you have to take the product net of its use in other sectors, so there's no double counting. Then that product has to be multiplied by price, because how are you going to compare kilograms with liters and with the volumes and so on? So you have to all reduce it to a one metric, and that metric is value. And that value, so you, if you use today's, last year's price to value, and this year's price to value this year's production, then there is an inflation component built into it. If prices rise, then value will also rise. So we came up with what Paul Samuelson and myself wrote, what has now become a classic, called the invariant index numbers, which is published in the Journal of American Economic Review. And also, 10 years later, for international comparisons, we wrote a paper which is published in the Economic Journal, published by the University of Cambridge. So what we have said is that either you use the price of the first year for both years, or you use the next year's price for both years, backwards. So the first one is called last year index, and the second one is called past index. So you have to have what is called as constant price valuation. Otherwise, increase in production from GDP, you cannot get that answer correctly unless you eliminate the inflation factor from the calculation. And the only way you can remove the inflation factor is fix the price of the base year, take the price of the base year, evaluate the base year production, as also evaluate the next year's production in the base year price. Or you use the next year prices in the base year production to value it, and also in the final year. So price factor must be kept fixed. Then only you will get the production answer. Now today, if you read our economic survey of the latest one, you have no clue what they are saying. $5 trillion in 2024. In current prices or in today's prices? If it's in current prices, it means nothing. If we're supposing there's a huge inflation in the next 3-4 years, then of course he will cross 5 trillion. Why 5 trillion? He'll get 25 trillion. So if you say no, this year's price, it will be 5 trillion, this year's price. In that case, what is the growth rate? If your present, when he said it, when the Prime Minister said it, the GDP was $2.5 trillion. And he says that in 5 years it will be $5 trillion, means doubling. If you double in 5 years, then what is the growth rate? Well, there is a rule of thumb I can give you. 72 fixed number divided by the number of years. So 72 divided by 5 is how much? 14.4% per year. Have we achieved 14.4% per year for 5 years? Ever in our life? Even 10% we have not crossed. Even attaining 10% has been very difficult. It should not be difficult, but it has been difficult because I have not yet become finance minister, so So therefore, this is not made clear. And the finance minister in a speech says nominal. What do you mean nominal? I, as an economist, know what nominal means. It means current prices. That means, she says, we'll achieve it. And even on that, what kind of inflation should it be? She says we are going to have a growth rate of 10% per year nominally. That is, 8% is inflation and 2% is production. So, therefore, valuation. Now, when you start comparing countries, another reason I told the Prime Minister, you don't know economics. I told him on his face. He said we were sixth largest country in GDP. Now we are fifth largest. So I said, on what basis? He said, you know, he must have called the economic advisor, and that guy trembling, he said, no, yes sir, no sir. But how can I compare? See, supposing I want to, today our GDP, say May of 2014, GDP was $2.5 trillion. How, you got it in dollars, how? Because you used your exchange rate. And exchange rate was what? About 70 rupees to a dollar. Now, assuming it is 70 rupees per dollar in 2014, then there is no problem of conversion. But supposing, leave alone 5 years from now, today, as of May 24th, 2014, it is 70 to a dollar. Tomorrow, I make it 35 rupees a dollar. There's no one to stop me from making it. In my opinion, anybody with a little sense in economics can do it. But if I do it, supposing any foreign finance minister does it, he says from today onwards, I'm announcing that we are going to have fixed exchange rates, and that fixed exchange rate is 35 rupees to a dollar. Nothing extraordinary, because in 1977 it was only 7 rupees a dollar. Today it's gone to 70 rupees a dollar, because we have made it free. And in free it is all international market, all kinds of short selling, every kind of thing which, you know, can manipulate any currency to any level. Especially the Americans are adept at doing that. And especially if you have your black money going abroad and coming back as participatory notes, as in short-term loans through Mauritius, because Mauritius doesn't have any income tax imposed on it in India. Then what will happen? Immediately, because of the easy availability of rupees, the dollar price will go on rising. And that's what has happened. It has been rising now for only no reason other than the fact that there's enormous speculation on the use of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. So supposing it is 35, then even today we have got $5 trillion. Supposing we got $2.5 trillion at 70 rupees a dollar, I say no, it is now going to be 35. Then the same 2.5 will double and become 5. So Prime Minister can do jadoo and tell the people tomorrow, towards 2023, he can say, okay, I am now declaring that the rupee exchange rate will be not 70 to a dollar, but 35 to a dollar. Then he can say, I've achieved my target. In fact, he'll achieve more than his target. So you have to know which exchange rate you're going to use if you're going to compare America and India. This is the most important question. Which rate are you going to compare? Shall I use, one way is, you use the American dollar price, which is, that is the exchange rate which you use, which you will get nonsensical results. Or you can say, McDonald's sells hamburgers in India. McDonald's sells hamburgers in America. So let me find out what is the price of hamburger in America and what is the price of hamburger in Delhi. take the ratio and see whether it is. It is not 70. It will be 7 or 8 rupees only. 7 or 8 rupees. You will pay the equivalent of 7 rupees per dollar in India for a hamburger which is also of the same quality in America. Supposing I go for a haircut in an American barber shop, and in India you can get a decent haircut, I think, for 1,000 rupees in a 5-star hotel. You would know perhaps better, I think. No. You also sit in the road and get it done, is it? But the road fellows also do it very well. The quality is the same. I would say that if you took a haircut price, as from my experience, in America, take the dollar value and the Indian value, and then divide the Indian rupee by the dollar, you will get probably 5 rupees to the dollar. The haircut, same haircut will cause only 5 rupees in India to a dollar that is paid in America. If you charge 100 rupees, $100 in America, you will be paying for 500 rupees here. So this is the kind of what is called as the purchasing power parity rate. And if you use a purchasing power parity, you just take all the commodities, now you have computers, you can do it, and divide every product's price in dollars, rupees divided by dollars. And you get the number of rupees per dollars, and then you take an average of that. The average works out to be just simply for 26 rupees to a dollar. And on that basis, today itself, our purchasing power parity, PPP, GDP is $11.5 trillion. Already we are $11.5 trillion. On that basis, we become the 3rd largest country in the world. America, China, India. So, therefore, this $5 trillion is a meaningless concept, because I can manipulate it in any way. And if the exchange rate further falls to 100 rupees, then my God, you'll never be able to achieve $5 trillion. In my opinion, there is a case, in my opinion, for reducing the exchange rate between the dollar and the rupee. The NRIs will curse me for this, because they are sending money back and they're getting a lot more rupees than before. But there is a case for bringing it immediately down to 35, and then in the end, to not more than 7. And the Chinese yuan is also about the same, I think 6 yuan to a dollar. That's about the correct thing. So here you see, again, by just simple changes, you can convert any result, you can have any result, but the correct result is from the purchasing power parity. We are 3rd largest GDP in the world, and we are already $11.5 trillion as of last year. So now, all these things put together, we say that how can we now assure that our economy improves, in the sense that this 7 rupees per dollar, or 5 rupees, or 35 rupees immediately, and 7 rupees per dollar rate come about? Well, the only way it can come is if you earn a lot of foreign exchange through exports, and you don't import much, so automatically you'll get a surplus in foreign exchange, and that will bring down the prices. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is just by fatwa, as they say. Just issue a notice saying we are going to have fixed exchange rate. We used to have fixed exchange rates before, and we only gave it up, I think, around 1973, 74. So they go back to the exchange rate, the fixed exchange rate, and you can fix it at 7. You can start with 35 and then slowly go on reducing it, because it's got no relationship. Foreign exchanges have no relationship to the reality of production. They are manipulated by by finance experts who sit in the stock market and manipulate it. So that is what I would say. Now you can say, well, that sounds too much. Is there any other way? Well, only other way I know is the Indonesian way. And what is the Indonesian way? I once went to an international conference when I was a minister, and next to me was sitting, it was alphabetical order, so after I became Indonesia. And sitting next to him, I asked him that I've just found out that your 20,000 rupaya note has Ganesh Bhagwan in it, printed. It's a Muslim country, and they're printing Ganesh. So he said, well, we may be a Muslim country, we have changed our religion, but we have not changed our culture. Our culture is Hindu, and therefore Ganesh Bhagwan we all worship. I said, but how did you put it in? He said, in 1997 our currency was collapsing. And when we tried every method, called all the experts, IMF, World Bank, everybody came. They couldn't do anything. Kept falling. So from Bali, one Hindu Pandit came and he said, bring out a 20,000 rupaya note and put Ganesh Bhagwan on it. And it stopped. He said, we have tried everything, nothing worked. So I said, all right, let us try this also. And it worked. So in India also, you can put Lakshmi on it. And it'll become 1 rupee to $1. So I'm joking, I'm not advocating it. I may be a Hindutva propagator, but I'm not so stupid. So I would say that as far as this $5 trillion is concerned, it's a meaningless concept because it can be manipulated anyway. And there's no way you will know because no newspaper is going to say anything about it. Even today they're not saying whether it's current prices or constant prices because most journalists, you see, they can't find any other job, you become a journalist, that kind of a situation. So they don't know, they don't cover. Or they're too afraid of the government. Something, criticism, maybe our newsprint will be there. Today, many of them are shivering for a variety of reasons. So my view is, therefore, learn GDP ab initio. It's a great, wonderful thing to play with, to see what all are the implications. There are lovely handbooks written by the United Nations, which you should call for if you haven't already got in your library, and read how all these 3 points. Point number 1, scope. Point number 2, what I called as netness and grossness. What you subtract, what you keep. As I said, if you produce steel and then it is used by producing bicycle, then that portion you have to cut off. From your steel production so that you get a net production of steel and you don't do double counting. And if you allow double counting, then anything can happen. So therefore that, and then this valuation for which the Samuelson-Swamy theorem, as it's called, that is something, it's a highly mathematical paper, you may not understand, but if you see the Economic Journal 1984, you will see a much less mathematical thing because we are dealing with international comparisons in that. And so these 3 things are the most important part of the GDP. As far as $5 trillion is concerned, it's a meaningless concept. What we should specify is the growth rate that GDP can have. And how do you measure growth rate? You take the rate of investment, and you divide it by the efficiency in the use of rate of investment, of the investment, and the capital, how you efficiently use your capital. So how is that measured? That's measured by something called capital output ratio. A capital output ratio is what the number of rupees you have to invest today so that you will get in perpetuity 1 rupee. So if you invest 3 rupees today, then for life you will get 1 rupee, 1 rupee, 1 rupee every year. If it is, if you as 5, if it's 5 to 1, that means 5 rupees you invest and you'll get 1 rupee every year. That means it's more inefficient. Our today, our capital output ratio, as it's called, is about 4.5, and our rate of investment was at one stage 37, and is now fallen to less than 30. So 30, say, let's say 30. If your rate of investment is 30, that is total investment divided by GDP, that is called the rate of investment. If your rate of investment is 0.3 or 30%, then divide that by the capital output ratio. Supposing capital output ratio is by our sheer efficiency is brought down to 3, then 30 divided by 3 is the rate of growth. So 10% growth rate can be achieved. Now if your rate of investment is 36, which it was 37, say 36, and you reduce your investment to 3, I mean your capital output ratio to 3, you get 36 by 3, it is 12% per year. So 12% per year is 36 we have achieved, and we can achieve again. 3 is an effort we have to make. So the main thing for us is the efficiency in the use of capital, which means fighting corruption. Most of our inefficiency comes because of corruption and people evading laws, because they can't think of abiding by the law. It's too complicated. Then you will be probably in minus and so on. So this evasion, this buying, not being able to get what you want as the price advertised, you have to pay the minister, you have to pay so many people. All these are now being called by a sophisticated word called transaction costs. So transaction costs, which is actually a method of paying bribes. And so therefore, if you can get rid of bribery, and the only way you can get rid of bribery, in my opinion, is not by catching the policeman or the clerk and so on. That you should do anyway, but that's not the main thing. Main thing is catch the big people. And if you catch the big people, then everybody will say, if they can be caught, I can be caught. The fear comes. And I can prove by a very simple equation on the use of expected value in statistics. Have you taught them expected value? Okay. You all know expected value? Okay. So expected value of a bribe which has a probability of escaping corruption, that is P. So if X is your bribe and the P is the probability you won't be caught, plus the loss you will suffer if you are caught, multiplied by the probability of being caught. What is that? 1 minus P. So you put that equation and you see you want this to be negative. So what should be the probability and what should be the bribe amount? These are things that you can put into the equation, and from that what your object is to create an environment where the expected value of a bribe is negative. If the expected value of your bribe is negative, then you will not ever do corruption because it's not worth it. Only if your expected value is positive, you will risk taking a bribe. And so therefore I'm after Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, all of them. And if anyone gives me trouble in my party, I'll be after them also. I am not going to spare anybody. But they have to give me trouble. Otherwise, I have not a justification. So therefore, go after the big people. Don't have any sympathy for me. This is what the Americans do. When they catch somebody big, they'll humiliate him. When that Enron scandal took place, they took the chairman of the board in handcuffs to the court. And everybody said, why are you doing this? Why should you put an handcuff? He's not going to run away. He said, no, we wanted to say, and this is an example. This is what can happen to you. We need such examples. And therefore, if you can reduce corruption in this country, the capital output ratio will go down automatically, the transaction cost will disappear, and you can easily accelerate to 10% per year. If you accelerate for 10% per year for 10 years, you'll overtake China. If you accelerate at 10% per year for another 10 years, you are on face-to-face with the Americans. And ultimately, we can beat the Americans because American growth is entirely dependent on innovations. And India got a young population, the youngest, in fact. We are of the big countries, our average age is 26 years. The average age of an American is 37. Average age of a European is 46 years. And average age of Japanese is 50. Ours is a young population. About 70% of our people are below the age of 35. If we can manage to motivate our young people to go for innovations, and there are lots of innovations, thorium reactor, hydrogen fuel cells from automobiles, desalination of seawater, all these are available, which will all promote your growth rate, in fact put you on a higher and higher curve. If you can do that, then of course you don't have to worry about $5 trillion. You will overtake the Americans by another 20 years. And once you're there, you will stay there. And we were once upon a time the most prosperous country in the world for not just a few years. We were there for thousands of years. Till 1750, our GDP was the highest in the world. And it's only after they took, of course, from 1100 it started going down. But after 1750, it went down much faster and much sharper. And it's all there in my book, new book called Reset. I've given my first few chapters about how British imperialism completely sucked all our resources. $71 trillion is my estimate of how much Britain owes us. And one day we'll get it back because the Gujaratis are buying up everything there. I'm serious. The East India Company is bought by a Gujarati. I'm sure Mr. Devecha knows this. East India Company has been bought by a Gujarati by the name Mehta, you see. And I'm sure that now the Home Minister of Britain is a Gujarati lady. And now the one more minister, I think, Finance Minister, they threw out a Pakistani and brought an Indian, a Gujarati. So Gujaratis galore. I'm also son-in-law of Gujaratis, so therefore there's no problem for me. So I'm saying that there is just no problem. The capacity of Indians to innovate. Today, you look at America, Microsoft, you have an Indian heading. You say Amazon, Indians. Everywhere there are Indians there. And Trump has come all the way here so that the rich Gujaratis of America will finance his campaign and also vote for him. Because we have now become a factor in the margin. Same thing will happen with the Conservative Party. The Indians who used to vote, especially the Hindus, who used to vote for the Labour Party because they gave us independence. Some crazy idea is in the minds of our people that the British willingly gave up ruling India. They were forced to leave, they left. And but because it was during the time of Clement Attlee, the Labour leader, Labour Prime Minister, so we had a fascination for Labour. But this time, because Labour passed a resolution on declaring Kashmir as an independent country, all the Indian voters went to the Conservative, and the Conservative for the first time has got an absolute majority. So, and the Prime Minister is smart enough to know, so he's brought in a lot of Indians into his cabinet today, which is unprecedented, unthinkable, say, 40, 50 years ago. So, Indians are now placed in a way where if they get the proper education, the proper motivation to take risk, 5 trillion, 50 trillion will be within our reach. Thank you very much.